The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, hello. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. See a couple more people trying to sign on, so we'll just give them a few more seconds, let them connect. Okay. Well, we have a lot of material to cover in the hour, so I'd like to begin. This is the Report Designer Basic Training webinar. Today is Wednesday, October 10th, 2018. My name is Eric Johnson, and I will be your Windward facilitator. I'll be your Windward training facilitator today. I'm a technical support engineer here at Windward Studios. I've been here a little over a year now. Maybe you'll start interacting with me through help desk tickets soon. Well, welcome everyone. A couple more, let's just give them a second or two. We're just beginning the webinar. I see a couple more people logging in, so we'll just give them that second. Finish signing in. Okay. You may have noticed that when you logged into the GoToMeeting webinar, you have a toolbar. The arrow that you see on the screen is pointing to the raise your hand icon. So if anytime during the webinar you have a question or are experiencing technical difficulties, please feel free to click that button to ask your question or notify me of anything that's wrong. The prompts that I have for questions in chat are on my other screen, so I may not see your questions immediately. Usually I wait until the Q&A session at the end to answer questions, but I'll check occasionally in case something does get posted. Again, this is the basic introduction to Report Designer. We assume that you haven't used Report Designer. Maybe you've installed it, but you probably haven't built any templates yet. You don't know too much about the interface or how to actually add the tags to your documents. So we'll go over the very basic, the fundamental things to do with Report Designer. Next week, there's an intermediate training webinar scheduled where we'll cover more advanced features. But for today, the machine I'm working on is Windows 10 operating system, which is 64-bit. And I'm also using Office 64-bit as well. It's okay to use 32 or 64-bit. We recommend, though, using 64-bit as this allows you to utilize all the memory on your machine when building a template, because sometimes you're pulling a lot of data and it requires a lot of memory. I think 32-bit only allows you 2 gigs of memory. 64 can utilize all that you have on your hardware. And the version of Report Designer that I'm using is 15.2.402.0. You can always find the latest version of Report Designer on our downloads page, and whenever we release a new update, we always post it on our downloads page. Okay, I want to give you a high-level overview of what we'll be discussing today. We'll take a look at what's within the Auto Tag and Auto Tag Manager tabs. We're going to create a simple template using the for each and out tags to create a couple of lists. These 2 tags, the for each tag and out tag, being the most popular tags that you'll use. We'll go over the input parameters, or what we consider variables, which are used to filter before you generate the output. We'll go over a couple of data source wizards, more specifically SQL and XML. We'll cover how to generate a report and how to get some help at the end of the presentation. So we're first going to look at what's in the Auto Tag Manager tab. You're not going to access this tab that often. It just kind of gets your environment set up. We'll discuss the data source button, which is what you'll use to connect to your data source. We'll go over the Find Replace tool. We'll discuss the About button. We'll look at the License button. So if you're using a temporary key and want to update it to your permanent key, I'll show you where to do this. And we'll also go over where to get some samples and other tutorials after this webinar. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at Report Designer. I'm going to go ahead and open up a blank Word document. As I mentioned earlier, I'm using two screens. The Word document opened on the other screen. Let me just enlarge this. Put up a blank one. Okay. So when you install Report Designer on your system, there'll be two tabs added to the Word ribbon. You can see them up here, the Auto Tag tab and the Auto Tag Manager tab. But we're going to start off by looking at this Auto Tag Manager tab. So I'm going to go ahead and click it. And this opens up a bunch of different sections. I'm going to start looking over here at the data section. So in the far left is our data source button. And this allows you to connect to your data. So if you're using JSON, XML, SQL, or OData, these are the four types that we support. This is where you'll set up your connection. A little further over here to the right is the Generate Code button. And this right here is handy for the developer types. It shows you how to generate the code from this specific template that you're working on for our Windward engine. So if you're using the .NET, Java, or the RESTful engine, it shows you the code and how to reference the template and actually generate the output. Okay, moving on to the next section, the tool section, I'd like to point out this Find and Replace button. I'm going to go ahead and click it to open it up. And it opened up on my other screen, so let me go ahead and drag it over. So this is a handy tool, and it's an easy way to update all the tags in your template. So if you created a template and you gave it your data source a nickname, just maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just a nickname that didn't make any sense at the moment, but as you're creating a template and it gets a little more involved with its length and the number of tags that are inserted into it, you might want to go ahead and change that data source nickname just to make it a little easier for you to understand it. So you could use this Find and Replace tool. You could go ahead and type in here what the data source nickname currently is. You would enter in the name that you would like to replace it with. Then you could replace or replace all. Then you also have the options down here to not only replace all, but to select which specific tags you want to replace the data source nickname. You can deselect them all and select a couple at a time, maybe the if, else, and end if, the set tag, and the out tag. I mean, over here I mentioned this example we're talking about is replacing a nickname, but you also have other options, other properties here that you could use the Find and Replace tool on. Okay, next thing I'd like to point out is in this options section is this About button. And this gives you information on the version of Report Designer that you're using. So here you can see I'm using version 15.2.402 8.0, and my word is 64-bit. Let you know the version that your license key is valid through. Here, my license key is valid through version 16, even though I'm using version 15. Since it's an earlier version than 16, I am able to use that key. And it lets you know how many systems this license key is able to be used on at one time. Mine's a super key, so here you can see I'm on 50 systems. It also shows you when your license key will expire, and mine will expire next year, July 30th, 2019. Another thing this About button shows you is the IP addresses of all the people that are using this specific key at the time I click the About button. I'm the only one using it, but if my license key, but if there was others, you would see the list right here. Another thing within this options button is this license button. Options section is this license button. And this is where you would insert your license key. So if you're performing a major update, say from version 15 to version 16, then you'll need to add your new license key here. Or if you need to change from your temporary key to your permanent key, you'll also do that here. Okay, so today, watching this webinar, I'd say is the best first step to learning Report Designer. Second step I'd recommend is going to our Windward tutor. And this gives you step-by-step instructions on how to do something. So that Windward tutor is accessed within this Getting Started Guide section through this button right here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this. And here we give you a bunch of topics within the tutorial that you could go through: auto tag basics, connecting to your data source, auto tag tutorials, and so forth. Now click on one of these just to show you what it's like once it opens. So once you click on a topic, there are sometimes subtopics to that topic. And for the auto tag basics, is the insert and a tag for each tag and access and sample templates. I'm going to go ahead and click on this insert and tag subtopic. And here you'll find the objectives of this tutorial and also the procedures. And when you read through the procedures, we also give you a GIF to show you how to perform this specific step. So this first step, open the Auto Tag Manager ribbon. We explain it here in words, but you can also click on this Show Me How. And here's that GIF. It's a pretty simple one on how to open the Auto Tag Manager, but most of the procedures here do have their own GIFs, so we give you a video also of what we're trying to show you. So again, this is a great second step. When you're building your templates, you can always reference the tutor for step-by-step instructions on how to do something. Okay, my next recommendation in Learning Report Designer is looking at the samples that we provide you. So also within this Getting Started Guide is this Samples button right here. And I'll go ahead and click on it. And this opens up our Getting Started Guide. And within this, there's step-by-steps, there's tutorials, there's sample templates that relate to industries. And I like to point out this section down here, this additional section. It's where we're going to focus on right now. And this contains samples for XML and SQL. We'll be including tag tutorials for JSON, but we're not quite fully there yet. So right now we just have the tutorials for SQL and XML. So for this webinar, we're going to focus on the SQL tag tutorials right here. And now for any tag that you can utilize within Report Designer, we have a sample for you. And they're all listed right here. So if you hover over them, you can see the different options. So say if I wanted to learn more about the if tag, right here, just have to find it, click on it, and it opens up a sample where you can get step-by-step instructions on how to use this if tag. There's also further instructions on using the else tag as well within this sample. And a cool thing about this is that it's connected to our Northwind SQL server database. So you can actually generate output of these samples as you go along and learn the different tags. Again, a next great step for referencing the use of specific tags with examples of each. Okay, let's get back to the slides for a moment. All right, now let's go over the auto tag tab. Here's where you'll actually be creating your template. And through this webinar, we'll create a very easy template using some for each and out tags. Basically, I'll show you how to select the tag, how to pull your data in using the data bin, how to insert using the wizards for SQL and XPath. I'll go over how to create an input parameter and how to generate output. Now, just for an overview of what a for each tag does, a for each tag does three things. First, it fetches a set of data or the specific data that you want to utilize within your data source. Second, it can repeat that data through an iterative loop. For example, if you're creating a list. And third, it repeats the contents between the beginning and ending for each tags. And the ending for each tag just tells Report Designer when to stop repeating content with each iteration of the loop. The for each tag is a tag that you will normally use regularly. Though the most common tag is the out tag. And the out tag is basically short for output. So when you're trying to display data from your data source within your template, when you're ready to display maybe a number, an image, or text, this is when you'll use the out tag. And tags are simply placeholders for your data. The for each tag doesn't display the information, it just gathers the data that you want to use, loops through the data, and repeats the content between the beginning and ending for each tag. The out tag actually displays the data that you want your users to see. Okay, I'm going to go back to Word, and so we can start creating a template. I'm going to open up a blank document now. Okay, so the first thing to do when creating a template is to connect to your data. So going back to this Auto Tag Manager tab, I'm going to select it, and over here, the Data Sources button. I'm going to go ahead and click on this, and this opens up our connection editor. And here, I have my active connection. I don't have anything active right now, but it also lists your recent inactives. These are a few data sources that I worked on for other customers. But let's go ahead and create a new data source right now. So I'm going to click on this New tab. And so there's a few connection options that we give you. You can connect to Salesforce, we give you the ability to connect to JSON data, OData, XML, also SQL, and there's quite a lot of SQL options here. You may not have all these initially when you install Report Designer, and this is because I've installed some other drivers on my system to assist other customers with their templates. You can install different drivers in your system as well, depending on the SQL environment that you're using. In our wiki, you can find step-by-step instructions on installing them and also obtaining the proper drivers. But for today, I'm going to connect to our Northwind SQL data source. So I'm going to select this last option right here, this SQL Server database. Now that I've selected the connection that the data source that I want to connect to, I need to start providing the information for the connection. First field up here is the nickname field. This is just what we talked about a little earlier with the find and replace tool, and it's just a nickname for this data connection. Since we're connecting to the Northwind SQL data source, let's go ahead and call this Northwind SQL. And now when you enter in a nickname, there can be no spaces, all one string, no spaces. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to type in the server that we want to connect to. For this webinar today, we're going to connect to the mssql.windward.net server. And this server is open to the public, so anybody can access it. It will, instead of entering the database within the server that we're going to connect to, I'm going to move over here to the credentials section for the moment. This server is open to the public, but you will need to enter a username and password to access it. That information is demo, D-E-M-O, and the password is also demo, D-E-M-O. You can also adjust the display tables, user-owned, user and system, and you can hover over any of these to get a better understanding of what these different options are for. Today, we're just going to use user. There's this other button over here, this checkbox, read and metadata, and this is checked by default. There's only a few times that you don't want to pull in all your metadata from your database schema, but this is normally a great option to keep checked. Okay, now that I've entered in the server and my user credentials, I need to select the database that I want to connect to. So I could type it in right here, or I can use this drop-down list. And this drop-down list becomes populated based on the credentials that I've entered. So through this mssql windward.net server, using these credentials, these are the databases I can connect to. So since we're connecting to the Northwind database, I'm going to go ahead and select it. And for the most part, this is the setup to connect to our data right here. Instead of going this manual way, entering the server, database, and credentials, your DBA may provide you with a connection string. If that's the case, you could always check this box right here and paste that in to this connection string field. But we're going to use the manual process today. Last thing I'd like to point out in this is the root directory. And this is for using relative paths within your tag. So if you're referencing sub-templates or images that are on a shared network, you can provide the root directory for Report Designer to use to locate those sub-templates or images. So now that we have our information in here right now, let's go ahead and test this connection. So I'm going to come down here and click on this test button. And down here, you'll see that my data source test succeeded. A nice green comment, and that lets me know that I can connect successfully to the data source. If there was some sort of issue, you would see another message here, and it would be in red. Okay, now that I know that my connection works, I can add this new connection. And here you can now see it's listed in the active section. Okay, cool. All right, let's go ahead and close this now that we're connected to the Northwind database. All right, so you may have just noticed this opened up right here, the auto tag data bin. So after connecting to a data source, Report Designer automatically shows you the database schema right here on the right. And here is all the tables and views that I have access to. If you have access to stored procedures, they won't be listed here in the data bin. They'll be listed in the data tree. And I will be showing you that in a little bit. But right here, these are just all the tables and views that I have access to within this MS SQL Windward.net server with the credentials I have entered. So now let's just go ahead and create a basic table. Go over here to the Home tab, Insert tab. Let's create a table that's 3 columns wide and 2 columns, 2 rows. Okay, now that I have my table and my template, I need to use Report Designer to start tagging up my document. So for this example that we're going to be discussing right now, we're going to be using data from this categories table. So let me expand this. And this categories table contains a bunch of columns. There's the category ID, category name, description, and picture. Okay, so for the table we're going to work on, let's go ahead and use some of these columns within this table to populate this table. So let's go ahead and enter in the category name. Let's bring over the description. And lastly, the picture. Okay, now that I have my header row, we need to supply the data from the categories table into this table that we're creating here in our template. So I'm going to select right here underneath the category name, this column right here. And so tags will be added to your template wherever the cursor lies or is blinking. So with it selected right here, I'm going to click on the Auto Tag tab. I'll go over here to the tags. When I click on tags, it will give you a list of all the tags that you can utilize within your system. And you can either hover over any of them to get a short description of what that tag is. For the first tag that we're going to add a for each tag. So I'm going to go ahead and click it. And when it does, it placed that tag right where my cursor was, right in this category name column, its second row. So I want to highlight this for each tag and point out a couple of things. So up here in the Auto Tag tab with this highlighted, you'll notice this tag properties section. And you can tell that I'm selecting a for each tag by it indicating right here, for each tag properties. If I was on another tag, maybe an alt tag, you would see up here alt tag properties. Good way to know which tag you're selecting. So what I want to focus on right now is the variable and nickname field. First, let's go over the variable field. So by default, Report Designer provides you with a variable name for your tag. Here, they gave it as var name1. let's go ahead and change this just to be a little more descriptive. Since we're working with categories, let's go ahead and change this to var categories. Press enter, and here it'll just say, give you a pop-up. Do you want to update all the tags that reference the variable var name 1? Just only have one tag. Just go ahead and click no for right now. And this variable field right here that we're talking about, this is the name that Report Designer uses to reference this tag. So let's try to remember for this for each tag, var categories. And this is, again, just what Report Designer uses to reference this tag. But to make it easier to read the tag, we've given you this nickname field. So since we're bringing back data from the categories table, I'm going to go ahead and change this to categories. And so nicknames, just easier ways for you to understand the tags that are being added to the template. If we had it how it was, where it just said for each, if there was someone coming on looking at this template, someone other than the person who designed it, they may not know by looking at the tag what this tag reference is. So by adding a nickname here, we can tell that this tag is bringing categories. So it's a nice handy way to make it easier to read your table and to always know which tags, what data is being populated in the tags. Okay, now that we set up a variable and nickname, we need to select the data to be used within this for each tag. So with it selected, there's a shortcut up here in the tag properties section called the data tree. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this, and it opens up our data tree. And here you can see, similar to the data bin, we have our tables and views, but we also now have our stored procedures that we have access to. Again, stored procedures you can access through the data tree, not through the data bin. So since we're working with the categories table, I'm just going to go ahead and select the whole categories table so I bring back all its data. Okay, so one thing I always like doing when working on templates is to make sure that I'm working with the correct data. So with this categories tag selected, I'll go up here to the preview button. And this lets me see all the data that I am bringing back from this for each tag. So you can see I'm bringing back the category ID, the category name, the description, and the picture. As I selected the full categories table, that's all the information I'm bringing back. And as you can see, that matches the 4 columns that are listed here in the data bin. I do use this quite often. So you will see me throughout this webinar clicking on this preview button. It's not just through the webinar that I use this. I also use it when I'm working with templates myself. I always want to make sure that I'm bringing back the right data, and this is a good way to see what data is being brought back. So the for each tag is now getting the data that we want to utilize. Now we want to display that data, and we do that by using alt tags. So I'm going to go ahead and place my cursor just to the right of this categories tag. I'll go back up here to the tags button, select it, and this time I'm going to choose the alt tag. Now that the alt tag has been added to the template, I'm going to go ahead and select it, go back up to the data tree. And this time when it opens, it looks a little different than we just saw a few moments ago. because by default, Report Designer knows that we're going to be referencing the for each tag. So you can see the for each tag right here. Earlier, we changed the variable name of that for each tag to var categories. And here's that for each tag here and all the columns within all the data, all the columns that are being brought back by that for each tag. So the options to still select the tables, views, and stored procedures are still here. We just collapse it by default, as you don't actually want to pull your data directly from your tables. If you did, you would just repeat the first record in the row, however as many times as it loops through the data. So when you're referencing a for each tag, you'll want to use the columns that are being returned from that for each tag. First column we're going to populate is the category name. So I'm going to go ahead and select this category name right here. With it selected, I'm going to come up here, click Preview. And this again ensures me that I am receiving the correct data. So here I am getting the category name from the categories table, beverages, condiments, confections, and so on. Okay, now let's go ahead and add another alt tag. It's added for the description. I'm going to click on this description column, second row, go to tags, click the alt tag, and now we need to populate it with the description values. So I'm going to select it, go back to the data tree, still within the var categories. I'm going to select description. Last field, picture. So let's go ahead and put the cursor in that column. Click on tags, add another alt tag. Let's go back and select it. Come up here to the data tree button. And this time we'll add the picture data to it. All right. Almost done. We got our for each tag bringing in data. We got a couple alt tags displaying data based on the categories. The last thing we need to do is add that end for each tag. And again, the end for each tag just tells Report Designer when to stop looping through the content between the beginning and ending tags. So whenever you add a table, you'll want to put the end for each tag outside of the table. It's logical to think that you should put the end for each tag right after the last alt tag in the table, but in actuality, so you don't create the list all in one line, you need to put that end for each tag outside of the table. So if my cursor here, go back up to tags, and this time I'm adding the end for each tag. And again, this end for each tag is just going to tell Report Designer when to stop looping through the data collected from this categories for each tag, when to stop displaying the category name, description, and picture. And a cool thing about Report Designer is that we support about 90% of Word's functionality. We don't support word art, so we don't suggest using it in your templates. We would suggest using input tags instead to bring in your images and your logos. And so since we are using Word, we can style this table any way that we want. So with the table selected, I'm going to go up here to Table Tools, and let's go ahead and give this table an updated design. Okay, let's go ahead and keep the header row. Let's keep banded rows. Let's not add a first column to this. And let's go ahead and give it a style as well. So I'm going to go over here and click this drop down, and let's give it this green style. And there you go. That's how easy it is for me to style my tables. Let's go ahead and output this just so we can see what it looks like. I'm going to go to this Auto Tag tab. And I could click this output button right here, or there's also a drop down. I'm just going to click the drop down right now. And these are the different type of outputs that you can generate. You can generate docx, HTML, PDF, printer, RTF. We also have the option for PPTX, which is PowerPoint, and also XLSX, which is Excel, but these options right now are grayed out. In order to generate output of these types, you would actually have to use those programs. Output doesn't cross platforms, so if you wanted to output to XLSX, you would actually have to open up the template, create a template actually in XLSX to create that type of output. The default is docx, so let's go ahead and create the output right now. First thing they'll make sure that I have done is ask me, since I haven't saved it, it'll ask me to save this to my desktop or my disk. So I'm going to say yes. Come over here. I'm just going to select that. Say yes. Must already have one, so I'm just going to replace it. All right. Let me split the screen here so we can look at both the template and the output. Over here on the left is our template. I'm going to close the data bin for the moment as it's not needed, but here on the left is our template, and over here on the right is the output. Here you can see we've displayed our category name, our description, but we're not quite showing the picture just yet. This is more the raw data from the database. Let me show you how to correct this so we can actually display the picture in this line, in this column. So I'm going to close this output. I'm going to select this picture alt tag. And again, you can tell I selected the alt tag by the properties right here, alt tag properties. And within this section, I'm going to go ahead and click on this type right here. So we give you a bunch of different types that may be outputted. Could be a base64 template, a bitmap, date, hex template, number, PDF template, text. But to get a picture to be displayed on output, you would need to use this bitmap. So I'm going to go ahead and select it right now. And when that happens, you notice that the alt tag was changed to a little icon. And here, with this selected, you can also change the size of that icon. So I'm going to click on that. We'll give you different ways to change it. You can specify it. You can specify the height, specify the width. You can fill the width. For this example, I'm just going to go ahead and select specified width. And before generating output, let's take a look at this alt tag to make sure we are displaying what we like. So with it selected, I'm going to go ahead and click the preview button. And as you can see here, we now have an image. Let's go ahead and output this again, just to make sure our picture displays. And here, split the screen. And this time you can see over here on the right, we still have our category name, our descriptions, but now we have pictures within the picture column. Okay, that's thing I'd like to point out is that when you connect to a data source, you don't need to connect to just one. You can connect to multiple data sources at once, as well as different types. Maybe, for example, XML, as well as also connecting to SQL. So let's go ahead and add some text here first, just to separate the SQL table that we just created from this new table that we're now going to create. So let's go ahead and add just some simple text. All right. So now, as I mentioned, we're going to add a second data source, this one being XML, different from our SQL data source that we used up here. So I'm going to go back to the Auto Tag Manager tab, come over here to the data source button, and this time you may have noticed that we have a green circle. Earlier, before we were connected, it was a yellow triangle, but now that we are connected to a data source, there's a green circle indicating that there's a good connection. I'm going to go ahead and click on this. Again, opening up the connection editor. And you can still see our active Northwind SQL data source right here and all the connection information. But let's go ahead and create a new connection for XML. So I'm going to click New. And let's create a new XML XPath 2.0 connection. XPath 2.0 just gives you the latest and greatest functions compared to XPath 1.0. Again, first thing to do, give it a nickname. Since we'll be connecting to a Northwind XML data source, let's go ahead and call this Northwind XML. Again, remember, no spaces in the nickname. So you could come down here and you could either type in the URL that you're going to connect to, or you could browse to the file by clicking on this icon button. I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I'm going to go ahead and collect to one of our samples. And when you install Report Designer, you get within this Documents folder, this Auto Tag folder. So I'm going to go and click that. And here is our data and templates that we can connect to. These backups are just versions of Report Designer that I've used before. And just they contain backups of the data and template. But for this right now, let's go ahead and click on this templates button. And I'm going to come down here and change this to all files. So when you install Report Designer, we also install a ton of word samples that you can look through. Little over 200 samples are installed when you install Report Designer. And we're cleaning these up all the time. Here you can see a lot of Word samples. We also give you Excel template samples, Codified, PowerPoint samples, and tag templates as well. But let's go back to the Auto Tag tab. And this now, let's go ahead and select the data since we want to populate this with, since we're creating a connection to an XML data source. I'm going to change this back to XML just to limit what we see. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be connecting to the Northwind XML data source. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. Okay, once I've selected it, I could add a protocol if I wanted to. Could also add a schema. Not going to need that today for this example. So I'm just going to test this to make sure we have a good connection. And down here it says, yes, data source test succeeded. Now that we know it works, let's go ahead and add it. So now we have two data sources within our active section. We have the newly created Northwind XML, and we still have our Northwind SQL. And you can connect to as many data sources as you need. I've heard up to 9 XML data files being referenced at once, but we just need this one. So I'm going to go ahead and close the connection editor. All right, back to the Auto Tag data bin. We still are connected to our Northwind SQL data source. Here's our tables and views, but now we're also connected to our Northwind XML data source. Here it's a little different, as XML is different than SQL. Here you can see the nodes that we are connected to, parent node, categories, and its subnodes. So there's another way, there's a nice option within Windward that I like to point out. for when you're creating tables, instead of going through the effort of inserting a table, populating it with the for each tag, the alt tags, the end tags. Another thing that you can do, another easy way to create a table, is you can go ahead and select the table over here and drag it to the template. So let's go ahead, in this example, let's go ahead and bring over the employees table. So I'm just going to select it, drag it to the template, and when I let go, here you'll get a prompt saying, when we create the table, do you want all these columns, all these nodes to be added to the table? For this example, we don't need all this information, so I'm just going to go ahead and deselect all. And we do want to add the first name and last name to this table. However, we don't want the last name to come first. So we can come over here to this order button, click on it, and we can move our first name before our last name. We're also going to add the hire date, and let's add the country. So now that we have the columns that we want our table to be created with, let's go ahead and click on OK. And here we go. Report Designer created the table for me with all the tags that we needed. We have for each tag from the employees, we have our first name, last name, hire date, country, alt tags for their columns, and down below we have our end for each tag. I'm just trying to clean this up a little, as this is just the column names that we brought in. There's no spaces, but just to make it look a little nicer, I'm going to add a couple of spaces here. So that's, before we do anything, let's just make sure we're actually pulling the data that we want to see. So I'm going to select the employees tag, go back to auto tag, and click on the preview button. Okay, this preview looks a lot different than the SQL preview we saw a little while ago. That's just because we're dealing with XML nodes as opposed to table columns that are formatted a specific way. But I'm going to go ahead and collapse these, but as you can see here, we have Nancy as our first employee. We have another employee, Andrew, another employee, Janet, and so on. So even though it does look different, we are still pulling in a bunch of different records from an employees table. Let's go ahead and select this first name and preview it to see what it's returning. And here it's just bringing back the first name, which was Nancy in the list. Good. And again, we can style this table any way we want. So let's go ahead and do that quickly. With it selected, and go up here to Table Tools, click on Design. Still, for this one, we'll still leave it with a header row. We'll still give it banded rows. Let's not do first column. Let's give this one a slightly different style. The other one was green. Let's make this one blue. And again, that's it. Styled quick and easily. Now let's just go ahead and output this to see what it looks like. So I'm going to click on the Auto Tag tab. I'm going to click on the Output button. Say yes to save. Split the screen. Okay, up here, we still have a categories table with our category name, description, and picture. Just going to close this for the moment. But down here, we have also added our XML table. So here you can see we have our first name, our last name, our hire date, and our country. Hire date, not too reader friendly. This is just the raw data that's coming back from this XML file. Let me show you how to make this a little more nicer in the presentation. So let's go ahead and close that. Then go ahead and select this hire date. Come up here within the alt tag properties and click on this Format Data button. So similar to Excel, we can style this date any way we want. We can style the value based on what's being received. It's a date, so I'm going to go ahead and select that. Let's give this a long date format, sort of like that. With the formatting set up the way I want. I'm going to go ahead and apply this, close this. Let's go ahead and preview it just to make sure that it is returning the date format that we want. And here, May 1st, 1992, yep, that is the format we're looking for. So let's output this and see if the higher date looks any better. Oop. Helps to output first before I split. All right. So this time, again, SQL table still up here, still hasn't been adjusted. But down here, now we've adjusted this higher date column so that the format's a little bigger. If we wanted to initially, we could have formatted the column a little better in our template to make the values display nicer, but here you can see we have our month and higher date in a more format that's better for us to review, just the way we want. Oh, just notice the time I'm running a little late. Sorry about that. I got a couple more things to go over. Helpful things I really want to point out, so I hope you stick with me. It won't be that much longer, but I think I will run over a little bit. All right. Now that we have our tables created and it's displaying all the information from the data source that we're using, what if we actually wanted to provide filtering before we generate output? What if instead of getting all this information, we want to filter these tables down? Well, one way you can do this is by using input parameters. Do you want to save this? No, it's only asking because I expanded this higher date. So with the auto tag tab selected, I'm going to go over here to the input parameters button and select it. And this is where you can define parameters. So I'm going to go ahead and add an input parameter by clicking this add button. And first thing, let's go ahead and give it a name. So since we're going to be applying this input parameter to our categories table, let's go ahead and call this category. Press enter. Okay, we can make this required by default, and we do at this example, so we'll keep this checked. We can give this a default value. One of the values that we saw is beverages, so let's go ahead and put this in. Okay, and we can also define the type that this input parameter could be. It could be currency, date, integer, number, select, and select just gives you a report designer drop-down list to choose from, to choose the value to choose from for the value that you want. For this one, we're just going to stick with text, so I'm going to select that. With it selected, I'm going to save this. Okay, now that we have our input parameter set up, how do we utilize that to filter out the data? So I'm going to go ahead and select this categories for each tag. I'm going to come up here and select this wizard button. And this is going to open up our SQL wizard. Here on the left side is our tables and views that we have access to. In this center section is the columns that for each tag is bringing back. And beneath this is our sort section. So what if I wanted to sort the data in the tables based on category name? Well, we do that here in the sort section. So let's go ahead and open that categories table, and let's sort it by category name. So all I'm going to do is select it, drag it into this sort section, and now you can see it's being sorted, category names being sorted by A to Z. Let me expand this a little. Okay, now over here on the right side is just the data preview section, and this previews the data that we're going to be returning. And as you can see right now, it's sorting A to Z by category name. Here we can see it right here, beverages, condiments, confection, and so forth. If I was to click on that and change this to sort Z to A, you can see our category name table has now changed here in the data preview. We're now sorting seafood, produce, meat, poultry, and so forth, all the way down to now beverages, which is last. I'm going to change this back for the moment. And beneath this, down here in the filter section, this is where we will set up our filter or the SQL where clause. This is used to filter out our data that we, based on that input parameter that we just created. To do that, we'll go ahead and click here to add a group. We'll go ahead and click here to add a filter. And we need to select for how we want to filter by. So I'm going to go ahead and click here to select the node. And we want to filter out within this categories table, the category name. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. You can either double click it or click OK. So we want our category name to be equal to. There are other options. Say you didn't want it to be equal to, but you wanted to just have contains or not equal to or so forth. We do give you other options here, but we want to just make it equal to. And now, what do we want to make it equal to? We need to click here to set the value. Here we could add it in, but since we're using input parameters, I'm going to go ahead and click on this drop down. And here are the parameters that we could use. We only have set up one, which is category. So that's all that's listed here. I'm going to go ahead and select that right now. And now our filter is set up. You can see that a little bit over here. We used to have a lot more options, a lot more data to display, but now we're only filtering by the input parameter. And since we gave the input parameter a default, it is listed as beverages. This is all the data that we're seeing here, just beverages. Okay, you may have noticed that when we set up this filter, this where clause was added dynamically down here in this grayed out section. You can't actually update this section. You update this in the tag editor when you want to update this select statement. We'll show you updating this to the tag editor in the intermediate training. But for now, I just like to point out that here we added our where clause dynamically, where we're looking for the category name that equals the category ID. And you'll notice our variables are listed, defined by this $sign, squiggly bracket, and then the category. So this is how you can see the variables that you want to reference within Report Designer. Then there's also our order by, which we added in our sort section. So this is kind of cool. It helps you learn SQL statement syntax just by dragging and dropping certain fields into these columns. Now that we've set up our input parameter to equal the category name, let's go ahead and click OK. Now what happens when we generate output? Let's go ahead and click output, yes to save. When we now go to generate the output, we get this prompt for our variables. Here is our category variable that we defined with beverages set up as the default. We only have one variable right here, but if you have set up multiple input parameters, you would see them listed out. Let's go ahead and keep beverages for the moment. Click OK. Split the screen. And here, now our output is only showing beverages. Before, this SQL table had a whole bunch of other records listed, but since we're only wanting it to filter based on the value we want, here beverages was entered, so we only see beverages. Okay, one way to filter right there. But what about for XML? What if we want to filter this table in a different way? Here we did this top table dynamically using input parameters. Let's go ahead and filter this XML table a little more statically. So let me go ahead and select this employees tab, and sort of like and similar to this top tab, I'm going to come up here, this top table. When we added the input parameters to the categories, I have this employee selected within the XML, and I'm going to click on this wizard button. And this is our XPath wizard, a little different, and that's just because we're using XPath as opposed to SQL. At the bottom here, you can still see that our XPath is being generated dynamically. We're currently only pulling in all the data from the employees table. But what if we want to add a sort or an order by here to this XML table? You can do that by clicking this. Click here to add an order by. Click on this employees tab, and let's go ahead and order by first name. So with it selected, I'm going to click OK. Here you can see it's ordering now by first name and in ascending order. So let's scroll this all the way up to the top. Here we have Andrew as our first record, Ann as our second, Janet, and so forth. Now, if we click on this ascending, we can change it to descending. When we scroll up the top, we can now see Stephen is the first one, Robert next, Nancy, and we're working in a descending order down the records. All right. So this example was to go over filtering statically, and that means filtering the same way no matter how many times we output this XML data. So what happens if we only wanted to see these employees who were in the UK, for example? So we could do that by coming over here, click here to add a group. We click here to add a condition. And now we're going to click here to select the node that we want to filter by. As I mentioned, we're going to filter by those employees whose country is listed as UK. So let's go ahead and select country, click OK. Here we want it equal to, but if we had another way that we needed to filter by, we could do that by selecting another one of these options. And I'm going to go ahead now and click here to set the value. What are we going to filter by? Instead of using the drop down, we're going to go ahead and enter in a value directly into this field. So every time we generate output, we're going to filter those records where the country is equal to UK. So if UK entered, I'm going to click OK. I'm sorry, press enter. And down here, you can see it was updated dynamically. We're now going to be looking for those employees where the country equals UK. And we're going to order by the first name in a descending order. Okay. Now that we have our filter set up, I'm going to click OK. Let's generate the output. Say yes. We did beverages last time. I think seafood is another option. So let's go ahead and enter that in there. Split the table. And this time, our top table, instead of showing only the beverage records, we are now showing the seafood record because that's what we entered in the input parameter. And down here, we're also filtering. So this time we're doing it statically based on those records that have country listed, that has UK listed as the country. And we're doing it in descending order by first name. All right, now that's how you can filter your data either dynamically or statically. Let me just go back to the slides just to make sure I covered all the topics. We went over the SQL and XPath wizards. I showed you how to filter dynamically and statically. We went over the input parameters, which allows you to add input just before generating output. We added a default value. I showed you how to reference that input parameter in a tag, and I showed you what the prompt looked like when we generated output. You may want to take a screenshot of this slide now that we're on it. Here's some resources that you can utilize. If you want to look up anything from, if you want to look up anything from our knowledge base, you can do this at wiki.windward.net. This is our old knowledge base. We now have a new knowledge base out. We've been adding to it, but it's not as complete yet as the old one. So the old one is still out there. But you can access the new knowledge base by going to ahana.windwardstudios.com. There's this windwardstudios.com/user-support-center. And this is our support center for our users. Here is a quick landing page, so to say, where you can then go off to different sections, tutorials, knowledge base, new ideas. It's a nice starting point to go get a lot of different information. If you do need to retrieve your keys, if you need to update from 15 to 16, we will be releasing 16 soon. We're working on that. That's why I keep on saying 16. But if you needed to replace your temporary keys with permanent keys, you can retrieve your keys from store.windward.net. And if you have any suggestions, want a new feature, if you want anything changed within the Report Designer product, you can submit a request change or feature request at ideas.windward.net. If you can't find what you're looking for within our knowledge base, you can always reach out to our amazing support team at support.windwardstudios.com. Or if you prefer, you can always email them at support@windwardstudios.com. So if you have a question that you can't find the answer to, you can go ahead and contact our support team. Okay, next week we'll be giving an intermediate training. We'll be going over more advanced features of the for each tag. We'll be discussing column-based instead of row-based tables. I'll show you how to show or hide specific things by using the if-else tags or the switch case tags. I'll show you how to conditionally format your output. Maybe you want to show red text or fill the cell a certain color. I'll show you how to do that. And we'll show you we'll show you how to import as well. Okay, there's going to be a survey at the end of this webinar. Please feel free to fill it out truthfully. Any feedback that you can provide will help me and also the next attendees with the webinar. So I appreciate any feedback that you can supply. And now that we're at the Q&A section, let's go ahead and answer some questions. I do see that one question was brought up, so let me just have a moment to read it, and then I'll go ahead and answer it for you. Okay, the question was, sorry about that. Can nicknames only be used with for each tags? No, good question. No, just in the example that we went over today in the webinar, we did only add a nickname to the for each tag, but here we could add nicknames to our alt tags. We could add a nickname to our end for each tag. So end for each. So any tag within the template, you can add a nickname to. And I definitely suggest adding nicknames because they'll just make it easier for you to read, for you to know. So if this wasn't here, well, this one's a bad example because we are just pulling in the first name, but always try to add nicknames. It will always help you understand visually what these tags are trying to do, what these tags are either pulling in if you're dealing with a categories table, or what they're trying to display if you're dealing with an alt tag. Good question. Yes. So please, I suggest always trying to utilize nicknames. Doesn't only help you, it could help the next person coming in, reviewing the template, or it also could help you if you haven't been in this template in a while and you need to come back to it. Could always help guide you on what these tags are supposed to display. Good question. Well, that was all the questions that were brought up. I just want to say thank you all for joining. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and goodbye now.